She stood up to the wrong man until her father arrived and everything changed. Don't miss this. Like, comment, and subscribe. Kayla Johnson walked slowly along the edge of the school lawn, the straps of her backpack pressing into her shoulders. The air was warm, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass, and the chatter of students drifted behind her as the school day ended. She liked this short walk home. It was her quiet time, the brief pause between the noise of classes and the comfort of home. She was halfway to the front gate when movement caught her eye. A uniformed police officer stood near the school's entrance, leaning against a patrol car. He took a long drag from a cigarette, flicked the ash, and then, with casual indifference, dropped the still smoldering butt into the neatly trimmed grass. Kayla stopped. Her parents had always taught her to speak up when something wasn't right. Her father, especially, drilled that lesson into her. Wrong is wrong, no matter who does it. She glanced at the cigarette, then back at the officer. Her voice came out steady but firm. "Sir, you're not supposed to litter here. This is the school lawn." The officer's head turned slowly toward her. His eyes narrowed, sizing her up as if she were an insect daring to crawl across his shoe. "What did you just say, girl?" His tone was sharp, condescending, like she had no right to speak to him at all. Kayla stood her ground. "I said you shouldn't litter. It's against the rules." The officer pushed himself off the car, taking a step closer. His boots crunched against the gravel, and she could smell the acrid scent of smoke clinging to his uniform. "You think you can tell me what to do? You know who I am." "I know you're supposed to set an example," she replied. Her voice trembled just slightly, but she kept her chin up. He let out a short, mocking laugh, tilting his head like she was amusing him. "Where's your respect, huh? Maybe where you come from, people talk to cops like that, but not here." His words carried a faint but unmistakable edge, the kind that made her stomach tighten. Kayla frowned. "My dad taught me to speak up when something's wrong. He's not afraid of anyone, and neither am I." The officer's smirk deepened into something meaner. "And who's your daddy? Some wannabe tough guy?" She met his gaze without flinching. "My dad's Mike Tyson, and he's a hero." That made him laugh out loud, shaking his head. "Yeah, sure, and I'm the President of the United States. What, you think dropping a famous name is gonna scare me? Tyson, huh? Probably just another washed-up fighter. Means nothing to me." He stepped closer again, invading her space now, towering over her. His shadow fell across her face. "You think you're special because of him? Let me teach you something about respect." Kayla's pulse quickened. She wanted to back up, but she forced herself to stand still. She could see the hard line of his jaw, the glint in his eyes that wasn't just about authority, it was about power, the kind that wanted to crush someone smaller. Then it happened. His hand came up fast, and before she could react, a sharp slap landed across her cheek. The crack of it seemed to echo in her ears. Pain bloomed instantly, hot and shocking, and her breath caught in her throat. For a split second, the world felt frozen. The shouts of students in the distance, the hum of a passing car, all of it blurred into silence. Kayla's cheek burned, her eyes stinging. The officer leaned down, his voice low and taunting. "Now you'll remember who's in charge." She swallowed hard, her voice trembling but defiant. "When my dad finds out—" "Your dad's not here," the officer interrupted, straightening up with a smirk. "And even if he was, what's he gonna do? I'm the law." But before Kayla could answer, a sound cut through the air, deep, unmistakable, and filled with fury. Get your hands off my daughter! The officer's head snapped toward the voice. Kayla turned, relief flooding her chest. There, striding toward them with a look that could split stone, was Mike Tyson himself. His steps were deliberate, each one radiating controlled anger. His broad shoulders seemed to block out the sun, and his eyes locked on the officer with a predator's focus. Kayla didn't move. She could see her father's fists clenching and unclenching at his sides, the way they always did when he was holding back. He reached her in moments, putting himself between her and the man who had struck her. The officer took a step back, clearly recognizing Tyson now, but not ready to admit any fear. "She was mouthing off," he said, quickly, trying to sound in control. "I was teaching her a lesson." Mike's voice was low and dangerous. "You don't touch my daughter. Ever." The tension between them was thick, and students nearby were already pulling out their phones, recording everything. The officer's hand twitched near his belt, and Mike noticed instantly. He stepped forward, knocking the man's hand away before it could rest on his holster. Kayla stood behind her father, her heart pounding, but her fear slowly melting into something else. Pride. She knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that the situation had just shifted. And it was only beginning. The air between Mike Tyson and the officer was razor sharp, thick with tension that felt like it could snap at any second. Mike stood squarely in front of Kayla, his broad frame shielding her completely. His shoulders were set, his stance grounded, and every muscle in his body was coiled tight like a spring. The officer, despite the sudden recognition dawning in his eyes, tried to keep up the facade of authority. "I don't care who you are," the officer said, his voice a brittle mix of bravado and unease. "She disrespected me. I don't let that slide." Mike's gaze hardened, his jaw flexing as he leaned in slightly. "You don't let it slide. She's 12 years old, and you think hitting a child makes you a man?" His voice was calm but laced with an unmistakable threat, the kind that didn't need to be shouted to be heard loud and clear. Kayla peeked out from behind her father, her cheek still throbbing from the slap. She saw the officer shift his weight, one hand hovering just a little too close to his holster. Mike noticed it instantly. "You even think about touching that gun, and I promise you, you'll regret it for the rest of your life," Mike said, his voice dropping lower, each word deliberate. The officer smirked, trying to mask the flicker of fear in his eyes. "You threatening an officer now? That's a bad move, Tyson." Mike took a step forward, forcing the officer to step back. "I'm not threatening. I'm protecting my daughter. There's a difference." Around them, a small crowd was gathering. Students who had been lingering near the school entrance began pulling out their phones, recording the confrontation. Some whispered to each other, others spoke directly into their cameras, narrating what they'd just witnessed. The slap, the insults, and now the standoff between the cop and the former heavyweight champion of the world. The officer's lip curled, but he didn't move closer. "You think this little show is going to save you when backup gets here?" Mike didn't blink. "I don't need a show. I've got the truth, and the truth's all over those cameras." He gestured toward the students, many of whom now had their phones aimed steadily at the scene. Kayla's eyes darted between the two men, her father's towering presence giving her a sense of safety she hadn't felt moments earlier. Still, she could see the tension in his jaw, the way he was holding himself back. She knew that in his prime, he wouldn't have hesitated to drop anyone who threatened his family. But now, his control was ironclad. The sound of sirens in the distance broke the moment like a sudden crack of thunder. The officer's expression shifted into something smug. "Looks like we're about to have some company." Mike didn't take his eyes off him. Good. More witnesses. When the backup patrol cars screeched to a stop at the curb, several officers jumped out. The first one to approach immediately looked to the original officer. "What's going on here?" The aggressor wasted no time. "This man assaulted me in front of the school, put his hands on me while I was trying to do my job. He needs to be taken in." Mike let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "That's what you're going with? You slapped my daughter across the face. You mocked her, threatened her, and now you wanted to twist it?" The new officers looked between the two men, clearly trying to piece things together. Kayla stepped out from behind her father, her voice trembling but loud enough to carry. "He's lying. He hit me first. Ask anyone here." Several students shouted in agreement, holding up their phones. One of them yelled, "We got it on video, all of it." The officer's face tightened, but he tried to regain control of the narrative. "They're just kids. You really gonna believe them over an officer?" Mike stepped closer, his voice steady but cutting. "Over an officer who hits children? Yeah, I think they just might." One of the arriving officers glanced toward the school building. The security guard stood in the doorway, holding a radio. "Cameras caught everything," he called out. "Every second of it." The aggressor's face drained of color, but he still tried to stand his ground. Mike, however, didn't move an inch. He simply placed a hand on Kayla's shoulder and said, "We're not going anywhere until the truth is on the record." The crowd of students and teachers watching had grown larger, and with each passing moment, the balance of power was shifting. What started as a display of authority had turned into a scene the officer could no longer control, and Mike Tyson wasn't about to let it go. This fight wasn't going to end here on the school lawn. It was just getting started. The parking lot was tense and buzzing with voices. The crowd of students had thickened, their phones raised high like a wall of witnesses. Kayla stood close to her father, her small frame half hidden by his shadow, while the offending officer spoke rapidly to the newly arrived backup. "He put his hands on me in front of all these people," the officer said, his tone urgent, almost rehearsed. "I was given a lawful order, and this man," he jerked his head toward Mike, "decided to attack me. This is an assault on an officer." Mike's eyes didn't waver. "You call slapping a 12-year-old lawful?" His voice cut through the murmurs around them. "You touched my daughter. I stopped you." One of the backup officers looked uncertain, glancing at Kayla. "Is that true, miss?" Kayla's voice shook, but she spoke clearly. "He's slapping me. Hard. And before that, he was making fun of me." She lifted her chin, pointing at her cheek, still red from the blow. "My dad didn't hurt him. He just kept him away from me." The aggressor scoffed. "She's lying. Look, she's been coached." Before he could finish, a student stepped forward. A boy in a school hoodie held up his phone. "I recorded it. From when she called him out for littering to when he hit her. All of it." Another girl joined him. "I got it too, and so did a bunch of other people." Several students raised their phones in silent agreement, the screen still showing the paused video. The backup officers exchanged looks. One muttered quietly to another, "We're gonna need to see that." But the aggressor wasn't ready to give up his control. He turned sharply toward Mike. "You think a couple of shaky phone videos are gonna clear you? I'm an officer of the law. My word stands." Mike took a slow breath, his tone cold and deliberate. "Your word means nothing when the truth's on camera." From the corner of his eye, Mike noticed movement at the school entrance. The security guard was walking briskly toward them, holding a portable drive in one hand. "Footage from the school cameras," he announced. "The principal told me to bring it out here before anyone tries to make it disappear." A ripple moved through the crowd. The officer's jaw tightened and his eyes darted toward the drive. He spoke louder now, trying to shift the conversation. "I'm placing you under arrest, Tyson." "No, you're not," one of the backup officers interrupted, his voice sharp. "Not until we see the footage." The aggressor spun towards him, incredulous. "You're taking his side? He's a civilian." The backup officer squared his shoulders. "And she's a kid. We're not sweeping this under the rug. Not in front of half the school." Mike kept his hand on Kayla's shoulder, steadying her. "We'll go through this the right way, in the open." The tension crackled as the guard handed the portable drive to one of the backup officers. Several students offered to airdrop their videos to him as well. "Fine," the aggressor snapped, clearly losing ground. "But when this goes nowhere, I'll be the one laughing." Mike's eyes narrowed. "No. When this is over, you'll be in a courtroom explaining why you put your hands on a child." The crowd murmured louder now, sensing the shift. The officer no longer held the room or the scene. The truth had too many witnesses, too many angles, too much momentum to be stopped here. As Mike guided Kayla toward the sidewalk, he caught the eye of one of the students holding a phone. "Don't lose that video," he said firmly. "It's going to make all the difference." The student nodded solemnly. "Don't worry, I won't." Behind them, the backup officers were already reviewing the footage, their expressions darkening with each passing second. The aggressor tried to linger, but every look from his peers carried the same weight. His story was collapsing. Mike knew this wasn't finished. The real fight, the one that would strip away every lie, was only days away. And he was ready. The next morning, the house was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the clock in the kitchen. Mike sat at the table with a mug of black coffee, staring at his phone. Across from him, Kayla was picking at her cereal, her spoon barely moving. The bruise on her cheek was faint but still there, a dark reminder of what had happened. "You didn't sleep, did you?" Mike asked softly. Kayla shook her head. "Every time I closed my eyes, I kept hearing him and seeing, you know." She touched her cheek gently. Mike leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "That's why we're not letting this slide. We're going to make sure the truth comes out, and he never does this to anyone else." He opened his phone and scrolled to a number. "I'm calling Harris." Kayla looked up. "The lawyer?" "The best one I know," Mike said. "He's been in fights like this before, and he wins." By noon, their attorney, David Harris, was sitting in the living room with a legal pad in his lap, his sharp eyes flicking between father and daughter. "I've reviewed the videos from the students and the security footage," he said. "It's strong evidence, very strong. But he's an officer, and the department will try to protect him. We need to be airtight." Mike nodded. "What's our first step?" "Witness statements," Harris replied without hesitation. "I want every student who filmed to give a sworn affidavit, and I want the school to officially hand over the unedited camera footage before it mysteriously goes missing." Kayla shifted in her seat. What if the other officers back him up? Like, lie for him? Harris didn't sugarcoat it. "Some might, but the more neutral witnesses we have, the harder it'll be to spin." Mike's jaw tightened. "We'll get as many as you need." That afternoon, Mike and Harris returned to the school. The principal, clearly uncomfortable, met them in the office. "We've already provided the footage to the police," she said. "And now you'll provide a copy to us," Harris countered, his tone polite but firm. "For the defense." The principal hesitated, glancing toward the door as if hoping someone might interrupt. Finally, she sighed and called the security guard who returned with the original drive. "This is everything from yesterday," he said. "We didn't delete or edit anything." On their way out, several students spotted them in the hallway. A boy in a hoodie came up. "I sent my video to the police already, but I'll email it to you too. My parents said I should." "Good," Harris said. "The more copies, the better." By evening, their living room table was covered with evidence. USB drives, written statements, and Harris's notes. He sat with his reading glasses perched low on his nose, flipping through the timeline. "We're not just defending you, Mike. We're prosecuting him. Assault on a minor, child endangerment, abuse of authority. We'll hit all of it." Kayla sat curled up on the couch, watching her father from across the room. "Are we gonna win?" she asked quietly. Mike looked at her for a long moment, then smiled just enough for her to see. "We're not just gonna win, baby. We're gonna make sure he never wears a badge again." But as the sun dipped and shadows stretched across the floor, Mike knew Harris was right. The fight ahead would be ugly. The department wouldn't roll over, and the officer would do anything to save himself. Still, Mike had been in battles his whole life, and this time it wasn't about titles or belts, it was about his daughter. And that meant there was no possibility of losing. The courtroom was packed from the moment the doors opened. Rows of wooden benches creaked under the weight of students, parents, reporters, and curious locals who had followed the story since the first videos hit social media. At the front, the American flag hung behind the judge's bench, the seal of the state gleaming under the lights. Mike sat at the defense table in a dark suit, his broad shoulders squared, his eyes steady. Beside him, Kayla sat close enough to feel the warmth of his arm. Her hair was neatly pulled back, the faint mark on her cheek almost healed but still visible if you knew where to look. Harris sat between them and the judge's bench, flipping through a binder stuffed with exhibits. The officer sat across the room at the prosecution's table, his uniform crisp, his jaw clenched. He avoided looking at the jury or at Kayla. His lawyer whispered something to him, but his hands were tight fists on the table. The bailiff called the court to order, and the judge entered, her gaze sweeping over the room. "We are here to hear the case of State versus Officer Richard Maloney, charged with assault, child endangerment, and abuse of authority." The prosecution went first, their tone measured but defensive. "This was a misunderstanding," the prosecutor began. "Officer Maloney was attempting to maintain order when the defendant, Mr. Tyson, physically interfered, leading to an altercation." Harris was on his feet instantly. "Objection. The facts will show the officer initiated physical contact with a minor." The judge nodded. "Noted. Continue." The prosecution called their first witness, one of the backup officers from that day. He testified that when he arrived he saw tension between Maloney and Tyson, but admitted he had not witnessed the beginning of the encounter. The prosecutor pushed the angle of disrespect to law enforcement, but the cracks were already showing. When it was Harris's turn, his voice was calm, but his questions cut like a blade. "Officer Daniels, you testified you didn't see how the encounter began, so you cannot say under oath that you saw Mr. Tyson assault Officer Maloney, correct?" A pause. "Correct." The defense's first major move came when Harris introduced the school security footage. The large screen flickered on, and the grainy but clear video played for the jury. Kayla, standing on the lawn speaking to Maloney, his looming stance, his mocking gestures, and finally, the slap that drew gasps from the spectators. The officer's lawyer objected, but the judge overruled it. The jury will consider the evidence. Next came the student videos. From multiple angles, the same sequence played out. Kayla's defiance, Maloney's aggression, Mike stepping in only after the slap. The sounds of the crowd's reaction in the footage made the real-life courtroom just as tense. Witness after witness took the stand. The boy in the hoodie, the girl with the ponytail, the school security guard. Each told the same story, their words stacking into an unshakable wall of truth. Finally, Kayla was called. She walked to the witness stand, her small hands clasped together. Harris kept his questions gentle. "Kayla, can you tell the jury what happened that day in your own words?" Her voice was steady, but everyone could hear the emotion beneath it. "He threw trash on the lawn. I told him it wasn't right. He got mad, called me things I don't want to repeat. Then he hit me. My dad came and stood in front of me so he couldn't hurt me again." The prosecutor tried to suggest she was exaggerating, but Kayla didn't falter. If it didn't happen, why would so many people record it? Why would the cameras show it? When she stepped down, Mike squeezed her shoulder as she passed. By the time Harris gave his closing argument, the case was no longer about just one slap. It was about power, integrity, and the abuse of both. "No badge," Harris told the jury, "gives anyone the right to harm a child and then lie to save themselves. The truth is here in this courtroom, in your hands. Do the right thing." The jury deliberated for just under 2 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood. "We find the defendant guilty on all counts." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. Maloney's head dropped into his hands. The judge's voice was firm. "Officer Richard Maloney, you are hereby sentenced to 3 years in state prison and permanently barred from serving in law enforcement." Kayla's hand found her father's, and Mike held it tight. Justice wasn't just an idea anymore. It was real, right here in front of them. The heavy wooden doors of the courthouse swung open, letting in a rush of cool afternoon air. Mike Tyson stepped out first, his hand resting gently on Kayla's shoulder, guiding her through the crowd that had gathered outside. The buzz of voices, the flashes from reporters' cameras, and the faint scent of city streets all crashed together in a moment that felt strangely unreal. Kayla's small fingers gripped her father's, her eyes wide but steady. She had just faced a courtroom full of strangers, told her truth, and watched the man who had hurt her be held accountable. The weight of it was still settling in her chest. Reporters surged forward, microphones outstretched. "Mike, how does it feel to win?" "Kayla, what would you say to other kids in your situation?" "Do you believe this verdict will change how officers treat people in this community?" Mike didn't slow down, his expression calm but unreadable. "We said what we needed to say in court," he replied evenly. "The verdict speaks for itself." The crowd of supporters cheered from the courthouse steps. Some were parents holding their own children close. Others were students from Kayla's school, phones raised recording every moment. A few held handmade signs. "Justice for Kayla, truth wins, no one is above the law." Kayla glanced up at her father. "They're all here for us?" Mike nodded. "Yeah. They're here because they saw what happened and knew it was wrong. You stood up, Kayla, and now they're standing with you." They walked together down the steps, each step feeling lighter than the last. Harris was just behind them, his briefcase in hand, wearing the faint smile of a man who'd fought hard and won. "It's over now," he said, more to Kayla than to Mike. "You can go home and live your life without this hanging over you." But Mike knew it was more than just over. This was a line drawn in stone, a statement that no badge, no uniform, no position of power could justify harming a child. And it was proof that even against the odds, the truth could win. They reached the sidewalk where a black SUV waited. Mike opened the back door for Kayla, but she paused, looking back at the courthouse one last time. "I was so scared that day," she said quietly. "But now I'm proud. Not just because we won, but because we didn't let him scare us into silence." Mike crouched slightly so he was at her eye level. "You were brave before the verdict, Kayla. You spoke up when it mattered. That's what makes you strong. The verdict, that's just the world catching up to the truth you already knew." She smiled then, a real smile, and climbed into the SUV. Mike followed, closing the door behind them. As the driver pulled away, the courthouse grew smaller in the rearview mirror, but the sense of victory filled the air between them. Neither of them spoke for a while. Kayla leaned against her father's side, her eyes growing heavy, and Mike rested his arm around her shoulders. For the first time since that awful afternoon on the school lawn, there was no tension in his muscles, no battle raging in the back of his mind. He glanced down at her and thought, "No one will ever lay a hand on you again, not while I'm here." Outside, the city carried on, but inside that car, it felt like the whole world had gone still. They didn't need the noise of celebration. The real victory was the quiet peace they carried with them, knowing their names were cleared, their dignity intact, and that they had stood up for what was right and won. Justice was served, but the fight for what's right never ends. Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to like and subscribe.